So when we talk about political tolerance, we're not talking about whether or not you like somebody. And so there's some confusion about that. The Economist ran an article about a year ago that said young people are more tolerant than ever because they like all these people that we used to not like. That's not what we mean by tolerance. What we mean by tolerance is how you treat the people you most fundamentally dislike. And so it's whether or not you allow people that you most fundamentally disagree with, or even that you think are dangerous to society, to have a public protest, to have a book published and put in the public library. And one of the common questions is whether or not you would allow somebody with those views you despise to teach college and university courses. And that consistently is the lowest level of tolerance of all the measures, whether or not you would let somebody speak in your community or publish a book. The one about college professors always has the lowest level of acceptance. And so I think what we're seeing has everything to do with political tolerance.
But research finds that the more educated you are, the more tolerant you're supposed to be. Is that not correct?
That is correct, and it's still true. And so as we start talking about what's happening in higher education, one of the things that I repeatedly point out is that I don't think higher education institutions are causing this problem, because it is still the case that people that go to college or university are more politically tolerant than people that don't. That is still true. But we are seeing big trends in society where, for the first time since we started measuring political tolerance, the youngest generation is no longer more politically tolerant than their parents. That always used to be the case since the 1950s when we started studying it. And so the trend has reversed. Young people are now less tolerant than their parents, and that's a big change. And we're seeing the effects of that in society broadly, and then in higher education, I think because there is an ideological imbalance, when it does rise up, it can be a little more pointed and a little more powerful.
Is there any attempt to compare the extent or lack of ideological diversity on campus with the tolerance level of the graduates?
It's like you knew exactly what question to ask me. So I just started doing some research on this. And there is a relationship between exposure to intellectual diversity and your levels of political tolerance. And we knew that from social psychology research going back. But I did an experiment on my own campus where I looked at ideological diversity within people's majors based on the standard deviation of ideology within the major, and then correlated that with levels of whether or not they would attend a talk by somebody that they found offensive, other measures of tolerance, and there's a relationship. And so we just started playing with some national data, and it holds there too, just in case you're thinking that my college is special because I'm there and I'm remarkable, which is true, but it's also true of the national data. We're seeing those trends where even within majors, the more diverse a major is, the higher the level of political tolerance.
Sam, I know you want to chime in.
One thing that actually came out this morning from my former colleague John Carey up at Dartmouth actually found something that supports exactly what you said, which is authoritarianism and trust for the democratic system. As of the data that was released this morning, this is the first generation that is actually more authoritarian and more accepting of authoritarianism than what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 generations, which is very, very troubling to me.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you the question that I always get. What's so good about tolerance? Why should we tolerate people who are hateful and spew hatred?
Right. And what the research on political tolerance has shown for 60 years is that there are consequences to political intolerance beyond silencing the very group that you've just targeted. And so, for example, when we look at tolerance towards different groups, it's all positively correlated. So people who don't want racists to speak also don't want radical Muslims to speak, and also don't want communists to speak. They're all positively correlated, because what happens, I think, is that people apply this fairness principle, where they say, well, if you can't talk because you offend me, then maybe somebody else shouldn't be able to speak because they offend somebody else. And so what happens is the conclusions that researchers have made for 60 years is that it threatens democratic vitality, that everyone perceives there to be less political freedom in an environment when tolerance starts to decline.